Hello everyone, welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. My name is Harish Jayaprakash, part of Fast Track Solution Architect team, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's topic is about data archival and long-term retention in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. Presenting for us today from Microsoft along with me, we have Purvesh Vaghasia, our Senior Solution Architect from Fast Track team, and I have Ajay Kumar Singh, Principal Solution Architect from Fast Track team. With that, Ajay, over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Harish. So let's get started. So the agenda that we have today is we will be talking about the business challenges with the growth of the data in any ERP or D365. And we'll also talk about the architecture of our archiving framework. We'll talk about some of the scenario that we have already released or we have in our backlog that we're working on for archiving. And in the end, we'll also have some time to talk about a quick demo of the solution end to end. And then in the end, we'll have a question and answer. So let's get started. So the business challenge, when it comes to a business challenge for any ERP, right, or D365 finance and operation, as we see that we generate exponential number of the data because the table metadata that we have in D365 is like kind of, so much normalized that we get so many data. And for any given mid-market size customer in D365 finance and operation, what we see is that easily its data size is crossing over a TB in 5 years. For some customers, those are not maybe hitting that limit of beyond 1 TB in just few years. So what we see is that over an year growth of the database leads to several other business challenges. One of them is that having historical data in FNO or your AX database creates some sort of performance challenges for your inquiry screens, right? And the performance degrades over the database size increases. We also have some business challenges around SQL indexes. So example, we do the index maintenance for your database to our automation. So if the database size is going bigger and bigger, the challenge that we have is to find the right time, right spot for any given customer environment to do the rebuild index or even update stats. We also have a challenge, right, as a customer you might have experienced, our partner, is that when the database is in TBs, and if you try to move the data from one environment to other environment, it takes time. So these are the business challenges that we have been seeing from when the database grows beyond TVs for any given D365 environment instance. For customer and partner, for you to track your storage that you can track on the PPAC. So if you go to the AKAMS/PPAC and go to and then you can see it that on the left side there's the capacity, and within capacity, if you click it one, then it shows your FNO database database capacity, where you can see the list of tables which is taking the space here. You can see on the left side is that it's on the list of tables where you can see AXDB ledger general trunks is taking around 259 GB of the total space that you have. Now, if you want to look at what's the trend of that particular table, how it's been growing over the period of 3 months that we are displaying, so you can just click on the view chart, and when you click on the view chart, it normally picks up the top 9 tables, but you can remove and add the table that you wanted to have a maximum up to 9 tables that you can see in one chart. So that's what you can see how the data has been growing for you. So this is one of the key screens that we recently started to show for FNO side, so that you can track how your database is growing on the whole and which table is attributing to the growth of the database. When we talk about database and its growth, the very first thing that we should also think about to do my own thing that I can do without having to have archiving or having to have Microsoft involved. One is that we kind of wanted to put in a stress on is that the cleanup routine. So we have released several cleanup routines for the different modules, right, an area, and we have a doc posted which kind of explains those cleanup routines for each customer that you can see it, right? Not all cleanup routines are applicable or kind of relevant for all customers, But based on the previous screen, if you just see, that which table is attributing the most on your database size, you can look at those. Is there any cleanup routine for that particular table? So then you can use those cleanup routines. And any feedback that you have about any sort of missing explanation about any cleanup routine, just let us know or have a feed or Yammer channel. I have to post the feedback. The other thing that I just wanted to highlight here is that we have in motion of, can I make it an easy way, the right way? What it means is that I want to make sure that we can automate certain cleanup routines. So basically, I don't need to be dependent on customer and partner to do those cleanups. So I give you some examples that if we just look at our telemetry data that we have, right? Our top 100 customers whose database size is more than 4 terabyte or 3 terabyte, 20% and 30% of that is a staging table. So staging table for the DMF that we use, we have been forgetting to set up a cleanup routine. When I say we, it's only for the customers and partners. So what we did as part of 36, we are by default turning on the cleanup staging table cleanup routine for all customers. Now, and that the timeline for the cleanup is 90 days. So anything older than 90 days that we are cleaning. Point here, what we are seeing that it still is in the top list because 90 days for some customer is not enough to keep up with the staging data that you have been inserting because of your high volume integration. So we are encouraging you to go change those parameters, go a little bit more aggressive to control the size of the staging table. We are also doing some internal discussion about how we can go a little bit more aggressive from 90 days, maybe 60 days. But that is something that we don't want. We don't have any agreement. But yes, but the request here is that please go ahead, change those parameters. If it's a 90 days, is not enough for you to keep control of the staging table. Database log. So as part of 32, 10.0.32, for database log, if you enable a database log on any table, it does not allow you to complete the wizard until you set up a cleanup routine. So we added this validation as part of 32, but still database log is one of the big tables across all customer environment that we have. And the reason that we see it from our telemetry is that the validation that we put together was not allowing you to finish the logging if you don't set up a cleanup routine. But what I'm seeing that customers and partners, what they do is that they go set up 5 days of retention of database log. That 5 days of retention and logging transaction table can attribute to the huge number of database log growth. So we added some more enhancement as part of 39 that you can go to the database log screen, inquiry screen. You can see which table is attributing the most. There's a new tab introduced. You can go and see which table is attributing the most to the database log. Second thing that we also kind of came up with the solution in 39 is that we get a request that, hey, I want to do the database logging, but I don't want to go aggressive on filling up. I need the data for my audit purpose or maybe some country level kind of local legal requirement. So we also enable an entity which exports the data out from the database log. So you can use that entity to export it out either through Synapse Link or export to data lake on your lake and then have it there for your auditor if you need it. And then you can get rid of that from FNO side. Now there have been some question around that how I read my blob column, which is stores my actual the data. So we, as part of that entity, we enhance this to convert that blob data to JSON so that it can be easily readable in any third-party system. So we also recently introduced some more cleanup jobs. So one of the highly asked was the batch job. So we had a batch history cleanup job, but there is no batch job for cleaning up the batch job table itself. So we introduced a new cleanup routine which cleans the batch job, and that is kind of a highly helpful or maybe beneficial for the customer, those who have so many ad hoc batch jobs that we create in day-to-day business. So we encourage you that, okay, before we start planning about archiving, please do all the cleanup that we can do, and then we go for the archiving. Now, when we go to look at the importance of data archive, and we have talked about, like you said, like data volume growth is the one, system performance is the one, right? I have done my cleanup. I can't do further cleanup like inventory and sales line. I do want to keep those data in my system. Now, the only option that I'm left with is that to do archiving. So I will go and talk about archiving. So what it helps is that it helps in my database growth, system performance, and the cost. You might have been hearing from Microsoft that starting April this year, we started to enforce the storage cost. So that's one of the hot points right now is that, okay, and since Microsoft is going to enforce the storage cost, we need to focus on keeping the control of the database size. Again, from our data archival solution, which we also call it our data archival and long-term data retention, you can define that how long data that you want to keep in AXDB and how long that you want to keep it in the the archive. And then once you do all these steps like cleaning up the database, doing the archiving, it helps you to do the database maintenance, which is maintenance for the indexes and other for us, and moving the data from one environment to other for you. Now, just look at the high-level architecture of the data flow that we have in an archive data framework. So if you just look at here, we have two sides, like the left side, which talks about F&O database, and then we have right side, which has Dataverse managed data lake. So as part of archiving, right? So when you define your retention policy, so example, you wanted to archive, you have a sales line, which has 5 years worth of the data, and your return policy possibly say that, okay, I have a return policy at the two years, so I want to keep 2 years data in my actual live table in F&O itself, and I can archive 3 years worth of the data. So I want to keep 2 years in my AXDB, which is F&O live table, and then I want to archive the remaining 3 years to using archive solution. So when you define the archiving solution, what we do as part of that archiving is that we are seeking all 5 years worth of the data from F&O AX database to Microsoft Dataverse managed lake. So all 5 years of worth of the data is being seen there. Then, as part of that process, we move 3 years worth of data that you wanted to archive from F&O live table to a table within F&O database or AXDB, which is called F&O history table. So, example, if it's sales line, we'll move to the sales line history table, right? And then we go back to our Dataverse managed data lake and mark those records as an archive. So, essentially, if you see it here, you will have 2 years worth of the data in F&O live table. You have 3 years worth of the data in the history table, and then you have 5 years worth of the data in Microsoft managed data lake, where 3 years is marked as an archive and 2 years is marked as an live. Now, the question that we get is that, okay, you are moving the data from an actual table to another table within the same database, and how it's saving the space, how it's saving the storage. So the way we save the storage, and if we have a DB here in this call, if you look at any of our top table, like inventory, sales line, if you just do a data profiling, what you would see is that 20% is the data and 80% is the index. So if I was to move the 3 years worth of the data from actual tables to history table, which has 1 or 2 indexes only, right? It automatically reduces 80% because I'm getting rid of those index space that has been taken by my actual table. So that's the kind of saving that we have. Now, when we move this 5 years worth of the data to Microsoft managed data lake, we have the compression that we already have. There's a new index in the lake. That's already because it's CSV format. The next one is that how do we save more data is by using the column compression. So in lake, we use a concept called column compression. What it means is that, so let's say example of InventTrans. InventTrans in a standard D365 had around 100 columns, right? Or 120 columns, right? And out of that 100 columns, only 60, 70 or 80 is valid to your business, right? The remaining column is not being used. It's like it had all the default values or all zeros, right? So, and it's repeated for each record that you have. So what we do in the lake is that we compress those columns. So we create a one memory reference for all those repeat values and the columns, and we have a pointer to point to that one. That way we save a huge. So it's kind of more than 60 to 80% of the space that we save when we move the data from HDB to Microsoft Managed Lake. So this is all that we can, you see how the data flows from FNO Live to history, and then history to Microsoft Managed Lake. For history table, why we are doing history table? I think that's another question that we normally get, is that why history table? So the one reason that we do history table is that if you are moving the data from, say, let's say example of sales line, from FNO table to history, and because of any reason, you wanted to reverse it. Either maybe a business is complaining about, or something is not working, I want to reverse it. So if it's an history table within FNO, there is a way for you to reverse the data back to your original table. And when we do that, we do maintain all referential integrity. What it means is that we are keeping intact your rec ID. So when you move a sales line from actual sales line table to the history table, we keep intact your history, your rec ID, so that when you revert it, all your relationship or referential integration relationship that we have, it is being maintained. That's one reason that we are doing with history. And since we are doing history, you have an option to, there's an inquiry screen within FNODB where you can go and do an inquiry. So example, you are 5 or 3 years worth of the sales line, and you want to look at because of any reason. So there's an inquiry screen to do an inquiry of your sales order and sales line, which is in archive. You can go and do the inquiry. You can do some filtering. Again, we are not encouraging to build an analytics on top of it, or build, do a lot of filters and all on, because if you do a lot of analytics and filter, our SQL will, or automation will say that, hey, I need to add an index on this table. So we add many indexes on this table, then we will fill the purpose of saving the storage. Not right now, but in future, we will also have a plan where you can get rid of the history table. So example, now you are done, you passed 7 years, 8 years, and you don't want that history record that you have. So we will give an API to kind of delete the data from your history table to save for them if you want to. Now, if we just look at this data movement in more visual format, then we'll do some calculation at how it works. So if you just see here, it's kind of more simplified with some numbers that we wanted to kind of explain here, but you can see that live XDB, right? And then we have a kind of history table, right? And then we have managed lake, right? And why we do managed lake is one thing is that it allows you to do your analytics on top of the Microsoft Managed Lake. So it has all the data that you can do analytics. And then we also have a tool called BPA. I'm not sure if you guys have heard it, but there's a tool out there. It's in a public preview called Business Process Analytics. So you can use that tool as well to do reporting. Right now, it's enabling for financials only, but in future, we'll also enable that for the supply chain. So now if you just look at the match here, right? Initially, you had 1,000 record in a table, in a FNO table, right? Now, and history table as 0. Now you wanted to do archiving. What we do is that we keep it 1,000 in your live, and we replicate that 1,000 in Microsoft Managed Lake. So you have 1,000 in live and 1,000 Microsoft Managed Lake. That's an initial scene that happens. And based on your archive rule, say example, you wanted to archive 400 rows out of 1,000. So what it will do is that it will move 400 to the history table, and it will go, our archiving framework will go to the Microsoft Managed Lake, and out of 1,000, it will do a reconciliation of marking 600 as a live record and 400 as a retained record, which you can use and distinguish if you wanted to do a reporting, filtering, that, hey, I want to do only reporting on live data, not on the history and all that, you can do that, right? And then in future, which is not there in the right now, that you can even purge the history table. So basically, you'll have a live table, 600 records, and deal with 600 plus 400 archive, and then you can remove the history table. So that's how the data flows is. And again, against Microsoft Managed Lake, you can either use BPA or bring your own fabric for any sort of reporting that you wanted to do, right? So that's a kind of, on the overall data flow that we have for our archival. Now we'll go and talk about a little bit deeper in architecture. So we look at the event transfer. This, again, the one thing to mention here is that in event trans, it's been treated differently for archiving compared to our other tables, like the scenario that we have released so far. And again, folk maybe you are all aware that InventTrans archival has been GA past 2 years. So if you see here in the yellow and orange box is that the InventTrans archival moving the data from the live table to archive table within the same DB been GA from last 2 years. And then what we introduced new as out of this archiving and long-term framework is that moving that archive InventTrans archive data to the history and then moving that to the managed lake. Now, the question is that why it's treated differently. And so the answer is pretty simple, is that InventTrans, the reason we treat it differently is that if you have running average cost or weighted average cost, where the cost is calculated based on all the transactions in and out that you have, right? So what we do as part of the cost solution that we are already live, which does a summarization or consolidation. So what it does is that against each item ID, the dimension combination, it's summarizing your all in and out transaction. So, right? And it posts one summarized entry into InventTrans and then move all those detailed transactions to InventTrans archive. And that way you are still able to do your weighted average running average cost, right? And you can drill through if you want to do the archive. Now the new framework, the move that InventTrans archive to the history, and from then onwards the framework that we have for archiving and long-term retention will handle the ways that we for other tables. So that's the kind of, we are treating the bit differently, the InventTrans, right? So, and again, as we explained, is that two reasons. One is that the part of the problem was already live, so we are to add those customers. Plus, our intention is to make sure that, if you have weighted average running average cost, and your cost is not getting impacted because of archiving. If you have one thing to kind of highlight here, even if you have all the standard cost, still it goes through the summarization because we are not treating it differently. For archiving framework, it's not aware whether you have a standard cost or a weighted average cost or running average cost. Now moving to the next, where we talk about a little deeper in terms of what are the different components that we have in the archiving framework. I'll hand it over to Purvesh to go talk about this deep architecture of archiving and data archiving framework. Purvesh, over to you.
Thanks, Ajay. Hello, everyone. So regarding the architecture of the data archive framework, so this particular component box, it's a Dynamics 365 finance and operation. We will say that the documentation regarding that the setup that need to be done. So the step-by-step approach, that way you may need to follow those steps in the Power Platform Admin Center, and you will complete the installation of archive process, the components. That way, this add-in will get installed into the LCS. The name of the add-in is Long-Term Retention Archive, the add-in. So this is the microservice-based architecture that will keep on sync with Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation and the Dataverse. And when that particular job will be scheduled from the Finance and Operation using the archive workspace. So as an end user, you will schedule a new job. That schedule, it will trigger to the microservice-based architecture, and it will schedule a new job in finance and operation. That will internally trigger that the multiple services in Dataverse environment. And as Ajay has mentioned about that the live and the history table, so that component reside within the AXDB, and to support the movement of the data from FNO to manage data lake, we have a one-to-one relation that the data entity that have been created, and we call it as a BI entity. So for each live table in finance and operation that support the data archive type, it will have a one history table and one BI entity. We have to make sure the schema of the live table in sync with the history table, and the same schema should get reflected into the BI entity. That way, why it is a one-to-one relation with the live table and the BI entity? The short answer is we don't want that the complex entity to be in place. That will make the execution of the query slow on the FNO database, as well as we wanted to make that, the simple structure being moved into the managed data lake, so that it's up to the customers that you can use those tables based on your requirement. And syncing the data from live table to the managed data lake, it will be handled through the CDS virtual entity adapter service. And it will use the Azure Synapse Link and Athena channel to keep on syncing the data from live table to managed data lake. When you will run this particular, the archive jobs as a UI, you will able to see the different progress where that we have given that the activity log. Using that log, you will able to see what is the current status of my data archive job that I have scheduled. And behind the scene, there will be the multiple services will be running in a sequential manner, in a way that when the job is being scheduled, so first of all, it will perform the marking. Marking is nothing but that identification of the records that meet the criteria that has been defined into that my data contract for the query criteria that I have defined when I schedule the job. Once the marking is done, the reconciliation will happen, and the reconciliation will make sure that the data we have in the FNO database and into the Dataverse, we didn't lose any data. And after completion of the reconciliation, the move to history will begin, and the live records will get deleted, and those records will get moved into the history table. That way, and like the end cycle of that one archive job will get completed. Keep in mind, as of now, only one job will be in executing state from the archive perspective. System will not stop you to schedule n number of jobs. All those jobs will remain in a queue, in a waiting state until it get a chance to execute. It will happen across the scenario. So let's say that we have a GL scenario, sales order scenario, or the different scenarios. If I have GL job is been executing, system will not stop me to schedule sales order, inventory, transaction, archive scenarios, but it will wait until it gets chance. Once the data has been copied over here, the next question would be, how can I use those data? You can use this data using Microsoft Fabric, and using Microsoft Fabric, you will be able to query those data. You can build the Power BI report, and that way, as an end user, will have access to the data. It has been archived records been stored in the Microsoft Managed Data Lake. Now let's talk about the various scenarios that currently available in finance and operation with the current version 10.39. General ledger, sales order archive scenario, inventory transaction, inventory journal, and the text run scenario. These are the 5 scenarios currently available for the testing. In the future release perspective, the retail transaction will come soon, anytime, sometime into the either 10.40 or 10.41 based on the testing that is being done. But from roadmap perspective, retail is on the roadmap. Okay, so now that if I have to run that my archive jobs, there are some prerequisites that you may need to comply. For different scenarios, we have different prerequisites. So that as an end user or the business user need to keep in mind. And those prerequisites, it has been placed to make sure like that our customer will not, or the business will not lose any data. They have to make sure like in terms of that, that there is no impact on the financials or from the inventory perspective as well. So general ledger and text transaction perspective, that your fiscal period should be close and year-end process should have been executed. And that archival that need to be run in the chronological order. So it makes sense in terms of if it's 2015, then 16, 17, 18, and so on. You cannot skip that particular order. Inventory transaction on top of, so that the fiscal year, it should be closed, year-end closure process that need to be done. That is for sure. It has been included. On top of that, you need to make sure that inventory, the closing process is also been completed. So that way, everything is been, and as Ajay has mentioned, like in terms of that all the inventory transaction that has been posted correctly as a part of the inventory closing process, and then you are good to run the inventory transaction archival process. Sales order, it has been relaxed compared to the other scenarios. Only criteria is this order need to be invoiced. It will not stop you to schedule that job for any particular duration. It will take the from date and the to date as a kind of that the parameter or that the criteria, and all the sales order all in that criteria based on the creation date time. All the sales order will be picked up. Only condition is that need to be invoiced. So that way, those 5 scenarios that are available, you have some different, the prerequisites need to be compliant. Doing so, let's have a quick demo. So the demo will start with that finance and operation, the default dashboard. First of all, you may need to enable the feature using the feature management workspace. When the first time when you go to the feature management workspace, you may need to search for the newly introduced feature that is called archive with Dataverse long-term retention. By default, it will say that it has not been enabled, so you have option to enable it. Just keep in mind, if you have not completed the service installation, it will not allow you. Once the feature is been enabled, you can go to the home page and you will notice that the new workspace has been introduced. That is the archive with Dataverse long-term retention. It can be shown on your default dashboard as well as onto the system administration workspace list, archive with Dataverse long-term retention. By clicking that archive workspace, it will take me to that workspace. On the left side, you can see all the different scenarios which are the functional scenarios which are available. The GL is the first inventory journal, inventory transaction, sales order, and the text trans. Each scenario has its own UI, it has its own criteria. For the today's demo, we will use the general ledger as an example. By default, when you load it, probably this grid will be blank, so you may need to use the refresh button to populate this data grid. And the status will get updated against each year and each company. If you just pay the attention to, for today's example, we are going to use USSI. So for the 2016, it shows the ready state. It means if you go to the 2015, it says it is completed. So archive has been completed. That then only from the chronological order perspective, 2016 isn't ready. And if you go to the 2017, check for this, it is not ready. Why? Because 2016 is not yet completed. So for today's example, we will use the 2016 and that particular period for USSI, and we'll schedule a new archive job. So this is in the ready state. So this is the good example to start my data archive job. I have 2 options. Very first one, the blue button on the screen, that is the new long-term retention job, or you can use the action pane where you will have options to select that what function scenario you want to run the data archive. So for this example, let's select the ledger, general ledger, and click the archive button. It will take me to the wizard. Very first step of the wizard is give the name of the job. It's just for your reference purpose, like what name convention that you want to give it. The next step is to define your criteria. So for the GL, the criteria is the year and the legal entity. So for this example, 2016 USSI that I'm going to pick, and click next. This is the kind of the schedule. So I want to run in a single run, or I do have an option to run during the off business hours. When I say the off business hours, that I have a flexibility to define start date, start time, and stop time. So I just wanted to run during the off business hours, so that flexibility I have. For the demo, I'm going to run it right now. So you need to specify the date and specify the time. Click next. The next will take me to the review. So just before you finish this, your wizard, you have an option to review those. If you want to make any change, you can go back and make that particular change in terms of the criteria, and then hit the finish button. When you hit the finish button, it will go through that it will perform that validation. to just make sure like archive service is properly installed. There is no issue from that perspective. If there is any particular the field mismatch that if you have, it will take care. Once it is been validation is through, you will see that the job is in waiting to process state. It has been scheduled. And using this activity log, you will able to keep track of that activities that has been performed against that the job. This is the example of that it has been scheduled right now. But I have another example of the inventory transaction where that we run it for the 20 million the records of the data archival. So when you just click onto those numbers, it will take you to the activity log. And over here, that it will tell you that, that this particular entity, those number of the records that have been archived. When you click on the view detail log, it will give me the entire the log. If you just scroll down, it will take it through the start. This is the time when it was being scheduled. Then after the few minutes, it was being picked up, and the marking, that was the very first step of that data archive process that was being processed. And the marking, it will perform in a small chunk. And that is the reason you see that multiple records with the marking and with the keep track of the progress that has been happened. So it is not going to perform the marking in the larger chunk, but it will perform in the small chunk. After completion of the marking, you can see the reconciliation that has been performed. So reconciliation makes sure that you have a live data into the MDL, the data synchronization has been happened correctly. After completion of that, the reconciliation, it's moved to history. And after this completion of the move to history, that was the end of the data archival, the job. Now, after completion of the data archival job, how can I see that my archive records, right? So as Ajay has mentioned in his presentation, like we have given inquiry forms. So there you have two options, like using the restore button, you can perform the restore from history to go back to the live tables, and using the view history data, it will take you to the read-only inquiry forms. Let's say for the sales order, this is my header, this is my line at the bottom of the screen, similar to we have the sales order form, right? And when you click in the general, it will take you to some more details about the lot ID and some text that it has been placed. If you want to do the deep dive for this particular the sales order archive records, you can use the archive sales order details form, and it will take you to the more detailed view. When I say the more detailed view, similar to that the sales order in the line forms, but now that we have, you see the more tabs in terms of the general informations, all the details that you have seen in the live table, similar details that you will see over here in terms of the setup, in terms of the pricing and the discount details, that my financial dimensions and all. And on top of that, if you want to inquiry for that particular, that against that sales order, what was the packing slip and my invoice that was been posted, it will take you through the link through that my invoice journal as well. So that way you are not, as Ajay has mentioned, you are not losing that any track, but you will have a complete traceability of that particular end-to-end traceability of that my sales order that I have archived. Similar example of the GL scenario, when you click onto that the not completed status, you see the restore and the view history is not visible, because it will be visible only for the job which is in the completed state. And you have an option to restore, or when you click onto the view history form, it will take you to the read-only form for the GL scenario. So each scenario, we have given it the separate the inquiry forms, and using those the inquiry forms, you will able to see, and as a business users, you will able to perform that inquiry on the archive records that has been stored into the history tables. So that is the benefit of the history tables. So if some of the guys that if you are aware of, we have started this particular journey with the private preview of journal ledger, sales order, inventory transaction archival in 10.38. Now we are in the public preview of those functionalities. So 10.38, that preview is no longer available because of the private preview. It was supported with help of the flighting done by the engineering team. So now we are in the public preview. So if you want to use if you want to test the public preview of the data archive scenarios, we encourage you to install the 10.39. And since it is a public preview, you can enable this feature by yourself. General availability, we are still working on, and the engineering team is working on finalizing the date. So keep an eye on to the Yammer community. We'll make that announcement soon. As soon as that, we'll finalize the general availability of the features that is currently available in the public preview. Retail transaction, it is a little bit behind in the race. So currently it is under the testing. Once the testing has been done from that engineering, it will be available for the private preview for selected customers. Once that it has been tested for the few the strategic customers that we are already engaged with, we'll declare the public preview probably in 10.40 or the late 10.40 or 10.41, and general availability will decide the later on. Okay, so these are about the data archive. Yes. Now, from where you can get all the details about the data archive. So we have all the documentation that is been published on our learn.microsoft.com site. It will give, if you go to the overview of the data archive feature, it will take you through it will explain all the different archive scenarios. The step-by-step approach, it's very detailed documentation in terms of the steps that you need to follow as a part of installation of archive service in Power Platform Admin Center and the different the areas that you need to. Archive customization, we have a detailed documentation regarding data as well. So you can follow those the documents and you can address to the archive the customization. We strongly recommend to join our Yammer channel. That way, the customer and the partner get an opportunity to interact with our engineering team, and engineering team make the announcements regarding any particular, either the release of those particular features and everything that will be done on the Yammer channel. And the last in the list is the inventory transaction consolidation that Ajay has mentioned. That feature is GA. So if you want to learn about that documentation is also available on our document site.
Hey, thanks, Purvesh. There's a bunch of questions around. I'll go one by one. And I know there's a couple of questions around implications or considerations when they interrupt the custom field. So I know, Purvesh, you called it out. There's a session that we are conducting on 29th of May, which is primarily to deep dive on the extension options. If there is a custom field as part of this archives, tables involved in this archive scenario, how to handle it, we are covering that. So that's why I don't know if you want to add more to that, Purvesh.
Yeah, so please join us the next week. During that session, we are going to publish the details in terms of the scripts that the fast track has created that will help that our customers and the partner to identify all the custom fields in a one shot, and then that the approach in terms of that how you can create those custom fields, which are the tables that you may need to address, and that way, like it's again a step-by-step approach to include those custom fields in the data archive. But yes, that scenario is been covered in the data archive framework.
Yep. Thanks, Purvesh. And I know there's a recent question that came in. Will there be a session on how to set up from starting point and not only from FNO? I know Ajay has answered. Ajay, you want to come off mute and talk about it? Yeah, I see that you mentioned about step-by-step guide is going to be published on LCS.
No, yeah. So
sorry, in talk speech. Yep.
Yeah. So I think the question is around not just FNO but peaks, right?
Yep.
The other components and setting up the profile in DataWorks is all the steps will be published in the doc. So that's going to be available in next couple of weeks.
Okay. Thanks, Ajay. There's a latest question. What is the general runtime for archive jobs? Can they run without affecting a production environment performance?
That's the great question, I would say. So answer to that the question is each scenario is different, and the runtime for the execution of the data archive scenarios will vary, depends on the volume of the data that you have in your the sandbox environment, in your FNO environment. The performance, the perspective, we have taken care to just make sure when that particular, even during that initial sync, initial time that we have seen some of that, the AOS sessions got overwhelmed. And as a result, engineering team has taken care of that particular that the issue. And now that we have it has been managed through controlling based on the number of AOS sessions that you have. The parallelism of the initial sync process will be controlled by Azure Synapse Link. So it will always make sure that your AOS sessions will not be overwhelmed because of execution of the data archive jobs.
Yeah, and I think in summary, when the call made to archiving for the initial sync is the one heavy task that we see, that will go to AOS connection context and our auto scaling plus all the framework that just Purvesh mentioned will take care of any such thing that should not impact your performance of while you are doing testing or if you're running in the production. That should be taken care of by us, by our auto scaling on the features or the enhancement that we have done in last couple of weeks and months.
And keep in mind, I during that the architecture, the deep digest, I have mentioned the different services that we have at the data side. So some of those services are scheduled to run once in a day. So by saying that, even that if you are using the data, if you are executing the data archival only for one record, let's say for the sales order archive, if you are executing that archival for only one record, minimum time you can consider 1 or 2 days, because some of those services are scheduled to run once in a day. So it has its own defined time, and that way you can consider a minimum 1 or 2 days to complete your data archival jobs. And these services are scheduled to run in the background. Keep in mind, these are not a batch, the framework perspective, these are not the batch jobs. These are the microservice-based architecture using the archive adding that has been introduced. So the benefit that we have is most of the activities that will be performed, the controller will always reside at the data side.
Thanks, Purvesh. There are a couple more questions, actually. I just want to quickly run through there, Purvesh. Can the MDL and bring your own lake be linked for better reporting?
Managed data lake is, as Ajay has mentioned about it, the BPA as well, right? So BPA and the data archive is used, the managed data lake, same tables, same structure. So the framework is almost similar. Even the data that is going to place into the managed data lake is same. So using that MDL, using Microsoft Fabric, you will be able to query to those tables and you will be able to build your analytics.
One thing to add on top of it, right? Since as part of archival, when we talk about archiving, we have been mentioning about do your inventory closing, do your year-end closing, and do diligently consider the data that you are not frequently need for your analytics, right? We need to consider all before we do archiving, because if you archive the data that you frequently need for after analytics, right? Yes, of course, you can do it on top of MDL, bring your own fabric. But again, bringing your own fabric has an API limit and the cost associated. So just think about what kind of data you need for analytics and the reporting. Can I do only on my history table? Do I need to do, this example, if you have export to data like today, right? You are exporting your inventrams. You can also export your inventrams history. And you can do an union and do a reporting out of it the way you are doing it right now. When it goes out from the history, do you really need that from the MDL? That's something that we need to think about. Yes, in some cases you need, in some cases you don't. So that's kind of one of the analytics story that we have around this one.
And there is a frequently asked question from the customers regarding in the MDL, how can I segregate my live records and archive records? The short answer to that is when you enable the archiving or into the FNO for that individual table, there is a property called allow retention. When you enable that the property for the table, it will introduce one column in the database called sysdatastate code. And value of that sysdatastate code, if it is 0, that means it's a live record. If the value of the sysdatastate code equal 1, that means the archive. just keep in mind, that is what we use for the marking and the process that I have explained. So when that marking process that happen, actually the data archive framework will mark all those records that fall into the criteria that has been defined into in the wizard for the data archive job. Those records will be marked, and those records will move will get deleted from the live records, will move into the history table, and those records will get synced into the managed data lake. Another frequently asked question regarding that, and the same answer to that the question is in terms of that how did the delete action performed on the live table will honor onto the managed data lake. If you take the normal scenario, if I have created the sales order and then I realize I don't need that sales order, it was my mistake or whatever the reason, I need to delete that order. So as an end user, I will go to the system and I will hit the delete of that. I will perform the deletion of the sales order. When the deletion has been happen on F&O database, that action will be honored and the delete action will be performed on the managed data lake. But when the delete action performed as a part of the data archive, using that marking of that sys data state code equal to 1 in the F&O database table, those marking, the deletes happen on those records will not be honored or will not get cascaded into the managed data lakes. So that way you can easily segregate anytime. If you use the Microsoft Fabric, you can segregate live records and the archive records.
Purvesh, a couple more questions are way, Purvesh. Like one is a follow-up question, I should say, one more around the runtime. Could the users experience a record lock likely wouldn't happen based on scheduled runtime when you're performing the archival?
That's a great question. But just keep in mind, we discuss about the prerequisites, right? So when we discuss about the prerequisites, if I take the GL scenario or the inventory, the transaction archive scenario, inventory journal scenario, it will be performed after that the closing, either that your year-end closing that it has been happen or the inventory closing that has been happen. That means these records are anyway in the frozen state, non-editable state in F&O database as well. So I hope that answered to the question from the locking perspective.
Awesome. There's one more question around diagnostic function. Is there any diagnostic function available so that we can run and check the conflicts before the performing archival?
Yeah. So like the conflicts perspective, once again, I will go back to that. We'll take an example of GL. If I have to run the GL archive, I may need to perform my financial closing. And if I have any kind of the transaction open in that particular the fiscal period, system will not allow me to perform that my year-end closure process, right? So if I know year-end closure, no archive. So all those things, all those criteria from financial perspective, even from the inventory costing and the transaction perspective, it has been taken care well in advance before that we reach to the, as a customer, that I decide I no longer require this data in my live tables. That is the reason I want to take them into the archive from the cold storage, from the long-term retention. So those validation has already been placed. It has been done when you try to perform those prerequisite steps.
So there is one frequently asked question in that what happens if we restore this? And it's example, we did testing in UAT and I'm now restoring the data for production to UAT. What happens to my archiving that I have done, be it my F&O or be it my database?
That's another great question. Yeah, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you perform the restoration of your database from F&O, like the production database to the sandbox environment, you may need to perform the similar activity onto the database side as well. Otherwise, it will go out of sync. Ajay, would you like to add?
Yeah. But one other thing that I would mention, right, that until you have done the archiving in production, if you are still testing it out, and if you restore the database back to sandbox from production, you might have to do everything from scratch, right, Purvesh?
Yes.
Again, archiving, and for that, the better and the safest way that we have tested so far is to delete the profile that you have in MDA because it's going to do the initial sync again. You can relink the profile, but just do the deletion and do it from scratch. That's the kind of suggestion that we have so far. Probably need to come up with something different, but at least right now in the dream, that's the suggestion that we have. Restored, re-trigger the stuff, delete your MDN profile. That will delete the data that is already sent there.
Yeah. And that question has already been reached to the engineering team, and they have already started thinking even that kind of that the export database, the function when that particular perform. Currently, we need to perform the two activities separately. That FNO database side separate and data side separate. And they have started thinking about that. Can we optimize in a way using that only single click? We can bring both from the production database to the sandbox.
Yeah, and there's one more question, which is how do we handle sales charges? Is it going to be covered by sales order archiving, or is it separate?
Miscellaneous charges, or in terms of the terminology, I would say markup trans. So if you talk from if you think from the technical perspective, like the markup trans is the table. It not hold only the miscellaneous charges for the sales order, but it hold that the miscellaneous charges for the other tables as well, right? So if you have a scenario that you are heavy on the sales order, the charges, and you want to bring into that and the data archive, please join us at our next session about that. How can you plug in your either custom table or any standard table which is not been included in the current scenario, and that you will be able to plug in. But keep in mind, currently that the tables that it has been included in the data archive scenario, considering the most of the customers, which are the tables it has been used to store the data related to the sales order. When I say the sales order archive, it contains 13 tables. When I talk about the GL archive scenario, it consists of 10 tables. Text transactions, 10 tables. Inventory transaction, 1 table. Inventrans itself, inventory journal, 4 tables. And this comprehensive list of all the detailed tables, it has also been documented in our the documentation. If you go to the custom table, the archive scenarios list, you will get the scenario-wise table, name of the live table, history table, BI entity, and the virtual entity into the dataverse. So that mapping will help you to correlate each and individual tables.
Yeah, I think we are over a minute. Yeah, so just I'll take the last question which I just published, and which is all about AI's performance and turning that batch to normal priority. So there's a 2 component, as Purvesh mentioned in our architecture diagram. We do initial sync, which goes through interactive tables, connection context. Right, that's where we are adding our optimization, plus we are also looking at if we have to add more nodes to not impact your interactive processes that are running when archiving initial sync is running. That's one. Second is that when you set up the process optimize, process advisor, or process advisor that Purvesh was sharing in the demo as a batch job, yes, you can go and define the priority of that batch job, whether you want to be a normal, and then you want to be critical, or you want to run it as a low priority. That is something that you can define there. But yes, there's a 2 component, interactive and the batch both. Our recommendation is to keep it normal. Do not change that one or go low priority. Don't keep it a critical or any sort.
Thanks, Purvesh. Thanks, Ajay. Thanks, everyone, for joining this call today. And I found this very useful. And as Purvesh mentioned, there's a series of tech talk that we are planning. There's one that is scheduled for tomorrow, which talks about the CE side of things. And there's one next week on 29th of May, where we are talking more about extension options. So with that, we call it as a wrap. Thank you and have a wonderful day ahead.